Weatherford, Texas is a small town where neighbors wave at each other from across the street, where community ties run deep, and where the rhythms of daily life unfold peacefully amid a population of just over 33,000. A place where a few individuals stood out, known not only for their contributions to the city, but for the way they motivated others. It was also the scene of an unbelievable event that took place in 2009, where a family that was considered a model family and seen by many as the epitome of success and stability carried out the most terrifying and saddest criminal event in the history of that place. Today, you will learn everything about the sad end of the Kahler family. In 2009, James Craig Kaylor, better known as Craig, was 46 years old and held a respected role as Director of Engineering at one of the largest companies in the region. Karen, his wife, 44 years old and a picture of dedication, was a beloved fitness instructor at the town's local fitness hub. The couple had 3 children. Emily and Lauren, aged 18 and 16, were well known in the community for having a garage band, a local delight for those who enjoyed hearing them play and sing, and the youngest Sean, just 10 years old. The fateful events of this case took place in 2009, but to truly understand how this respected family came to such a devastating end, we have to look back to where it all began. Craig was born on January 15, 1963, and he grew up with every advantage. Charismatic, handsome, and an academic achiever, he excelled in engineering school, consistently achieving high grades and impressing his professors and peers. In the late 80s, while in his final year of the course, he met Karen, born on July 30th, 1965. They quickly fell in love and were married in less than 2 years. Emily, the couple's first daughter, was born in 1991, Lauren II in 1993, and finally Sean in 1999. Craig and Karen lived in Weatherford, Texas, a considerably small city with around 33,000 inhabitants, and the couple was a reference there. Craig had a high public position as an engineer at Weatherford International, a company that employed hundreds of people from that region, and his position earned him a salary, more or less $8,000 per month. If nowadays this amount is already good, imagine back then. Karen, in addition to being one of the instructors at the city's gym, Powerhouse Gym, was always involved with community health projects, such as hiking and other outdoor physical activities. Having 3 children, 2 playing in a band, and 1 who, despite being very young, was already a very sociable boy, the Kahler family was what many considered to be a family model to be followed. From the outside, it seemed as though they had achieved everything a family could hope for: success, respect, and happiness. But as 2009 would reveal, the reality within their household was something else entirely. In Weatherford, where everyone knew everyone, no one could have anticipated the sorrow that was about to unfold. Few knew, but Karen was in an abusive relationship. Craig was extremely arrogant. He sexually harassed her by making bizarre requests, such as determining specific times to have sex in places and ways he liked. But he wasn't like that from the beginning. He was once charming and ambitious, but had grown increasingly controlling, his arrogance taking root as his career and status solidified, probably due to his position in the company and his status in the community. His behavior escalated over the years, and by 2009, he was not only dictating household rules, but also stifling Karen's autonomy in almost every way. Another example, Craig was very annoying when it came to the house's finances. He meticulously monitored their finances, demanding receipts for any expenditure Karen made with his money. He also imposed strict household rules, including a nightly curfew by 10 p.m. Everyone under his roof was to be in bed, no questions asked. There were many warning signs that the relationship wasn't 100% healthy. But, as I said, the relationship didn't start like that. New things were happening little by little. Karen was giving in, letting it go, and without realizing it, she was already being controlled. The arrogant and abusive attitudes turned into emotional threats, physical aggression, making fear a constant companion. She remained in a submissive position for much longer than she would have liked and felt trapped. But in 2008, someone would change the couple's lives forever. Sonny Reese, the new instructor at Powerhouse Gym. Because of work, Karen and Sonny ended up getting closer. They became friends and confidants, sharing good and bad moments, and over time, the relationship evolved into something more, a passion no one expected. Karen had never been in a relationship with a woman before, and with that experience, she once again came to understand and feel what true affection, attention, and love were. Things she already knew, but that had fallen dormant over the years. It was through her connection with Sonny that she began to envision a life beyond her marriage, to imagine the possibility of freedom from Craig's grip. She had to talk to Craig and knew she needed to be very cautious about the matter. Karen intended to explain the problems she was facing in her marriage. She knew that this conversation would not be easy, and she had no idea what his reaction would be when he found out that this other person was a woman. Finally, she would talk about separation, but his reaction was something she could never have anticipated. Upon hearing about Sonny, he didn't explode in fury. Instead, he expressed a twisted approval. He even suggested that the relationship could continue under his terms, if Karen agreed to include him in their romance. In other words, once again, he wanted to somehow be in control of the situation. For Karen, that was out of the question. She had already decided to separate. He was the problem. Craig did not accept his wife's decision not to let him complete his 3-year period. He banned her from returning to work at the gym so as not to see her lover again, and started making very serious threats if she went ahead with the divorce. Cornered and afraid, she stayed in the relationship, broke up with Sonny and resigned. But shortly afterwards, they met again, secretly. Craig became suspicious and came up with a plan to try to end the romance once and for all. He began courting Sonny, sending flowers and making sexual advances. All was refused. When Craig realized he couldn't control Karen's connection with her, he resorted to a final, desperate measure. In early 2008, he applied for a high-ranking engineering job in Columbia, Missouri, over 1,000 kilometers away from Weatherford. After securing the position, he presented her with an ultimatum: move with him or risk losing everything. He made it clear that if she chose to stay behind, he would leave her without financial support. As they were still married, he would have no legal obligation to provide alimony, and he reminded her that a single income wouldn't be enough to sustain their large home, pay for schooling, food, and other necessities for the children. The other alternative was unthinkable for Karen, which was allowing him to take their children away to Colombia, removing her from their daily lives. As she wanted her kids to have a good life, and she didn't want to be far from them, she decided to move with him. So, in June 2008, the family moved to Columbia, Missouri. Distance could separate the bodies, but the feeling that Karen and Sonny had remained firm, mainly because they never stopped talking to each other. Text messages, emails, and phone calls were just some of the ways they stayed in touch. By December 31st, 2008, the Kaylors returned to Weatherford for a New Year's gathering with family and friends. This celebration, meant to bring in a new chapter, would instead ignite one of the most intense confrontations the community had ever seen. Sunny attended the event as well, and at one moment during the night, she and Karen slipped away to a quiet corner, sharing what they thought would be a discreet kiss. That romance, that was private for a long time, ended up becoming public as they were seen by other guests. In a discreet way, Craig ended up finding out about the kiss at the party. He felt humiliated and ended up starting in front of everyone in one of the biggest fights between couples that anyone in that community had ever witnessed. So far, we can see that both sides had taken missteps. However, taking into account the couple's history, the full weight of their shared history leaned heavily against Craig. Karen from the beginning did her best to please him, submitting herself to conditions of unhappiness, and unexpectedly, she ended up finding love with someone else. After this situation, Craig and Karen started sleeping in separate rooms, and their children knew everything that was happening. Emily and Lauren, who were practically adults, understood their mother and supported her in finding her own happiness. It seemed like this support was what was missing. This solidarity was the last piece Karen needed to finally take action. Weeks later, Karen made a definitive move. She formally separated from Craig, hired a lawyer to draft divorce papers, including terms for asset division and alimony, and began planning her return to Weatherford with her children. For Karen, this was not only a step toward freedom, it was a declaration of her right to a life of her choosing. On March 16, 2009, when Karen returned to Colombia to collect a few remaining belongings, the fury Craig had been harboring finally erupted. Confronted by her decision to move on, he attacked her, and Karen reported him. The arrest that followed brought both legal consequences and professional repercussions. With the case making headlines, Craig was dismissed from his high-profile engineering position, a role that relied on public respect and confidence. The loss of his job meant he had to sell his house and empty his savings, and at 46, Craig was forced to move back in with his parents, a deeply humiliating outcome that only worsened his mental state. It was a period of ups and downs, and as his family reported, he sank into depression and became an emotionally destabilized person. He was prescribed antidepressant medication by doctors, but Craig did not take it. He was immersed in the image of Karen and Sunny's happiness, with their two daughters supporting the relationship and him now on the outside. And here comes that saying, an empty head is the devil's workshop. During 2009, the divorce was finalized, and shortly before the end of the year, by late November, with Thanksgiving approaching, Karen and her 3 children decided to spend the holiday at her grandmother, 86 years old, Dorothy White's farm in Kansas. A calm, peaceful place far from the big city. The day had been perfect, with good conversation, lots of food, but during that afternoon, a fatal tragedy occurred. While Mrs. Dorothy and Emily were in the living room relaxing, Lauren was upstairs resting, and Karen and her son Sean were in the kitchen cleaning some old coins. A man carrying a rifle entered the property and frantically shot everyone in the place. He entered the kitchen and shot Karen first several times. Sean, who witnessed everything, ran under the table in fear as the man moved into the room. When Sean realized he was alone in the room, he ran out the back door and went to the nearest neighbor for help. But while this man was shooting in the kitchen, Mrs. Dorothy called 911. He then shot her and Emily, who were in the living room, then Lauren upstairs, and finally ran away. When the police arrived, led by Sheriff Nathan Perling, the devastation was unlike anything they had seen. Karen and Emily were gone, lifeless. Dorothy lay in the living room, her breathing labored, clinging to life. Miraculously, from upstairs they heard Lauren's cries for help. When Sheriff Nathan entered the room and found Lauren, he could see she was clinging to the edge of life. Her voice trembled as she begged him not to let her die. Knowing how grave her injuries were, the sheriff held her, offering whatever comfort he could in those final moments. Then, realizing he might have only seconds to find out who had done this, he asked, "Do you know who did all this?" Lauren's answer was chillingly simple. "My father." After committing the crime, Craig tried to flee along a road, abandoning his car on a hillside. The murder weapon and a map with the location of Sonny's house, which would most likely be his next target, were found in his car. An alert was issued, and Craig was located and captured the following morning without any resistance. Despite the medical team's best efforts, Lauren, who had been rescued by the ambulance, died hours later. Mrs. Dorothy survived 3 more days in hospital, but she also succumbed to her injuries. In total, the 4 victims were hit by a total of 23 bullets. At the police station, Craig confesses to the crime. He answered all the questions and hid nothing but everything in his version. Craig claimed that he did everything for his family, that he gave them everything he could. No one had anything to complain about. And then his ex-wife decided to cheat on him with the gym teacher. Craig described the relationship between Karen and Sonny as an aberration, conveniently omitting the fact that he had initially approved of the relationship, as long as he could remain in control. He preferred to skip that part. Instead, he fixated on the humiliation he felt after the New Year's Eve incident. Craig didn't think about the consequences. He wanted revenge. He had clear targets and he carried out what he planned. Sean was actually never on his list, so much so that he let the boy go. Craig's trial took place just 2 years later, in 2011, and was a horror show for those involved. Family members had to relive the moment of the crime and see what was the most shocking images of their lives. Sean, who was 12 years old at the time, gave his statement days earlier in a separate room with closed circuit cameras that recorded everything. He was accompanied by a psychologist and social worker, and the video was shown at one of the trial hearings. You can't imagine the experience this boy went through, and how much psychological support he'll need to have to deal with this memory for the rest of his life. As for Craig, he showed no regret. He smiled and seemed proud of what he had done. He was convinced his actions were justified. He believed he had acted out of a sense of righteousness to save his son from what he deemed unacceptable. But after 2 years of investigation, it was clear that what he felt was failure, incompetence, and loneliness. Aberration was just an excuse he used. Before the jury deliberated on the defendant's sentence, for which the prosecution requested the death penalty, a letter from Sean was read aloud in court, a letter that would leave a lasting impact on everyone present. The full content was never published, just 2 sentences that many say sum up what he wanted to say. The first sentence was, "I don't want my father to receive the death penalty, because that would be very difficult for my grandparents." The second and last sentence was, "I don't want my whole family to disappear." On August 25th, his sentence was read. After deliberating just 2 hours, the jury unanimously decided that Craig was guilty and suggested the death penalty, which was accepted by the judge in the case. Before being taken back to the prison system, Craig spoke to his parents to make sure Sean wasn't raised by a family of freaks. Since the incident, the boy had been sent to social assistance, but his custody was later granted to Karen's relatives. The sentence will be carried out by lethal injection, but a date has not yet been set. His Eagle team appealed the decision multiple times, citing potential bias among jurors, attorneys, and even local media, pointing to the small size of the community and the likelihood that many involved in the trial knew the victims personally or indirectly. The defense demanded new hearings in a new location with a new jury, hoping that at least the death penalty would not be applied, but it was no use. All requests have been and continue to be denied to this day. Craig is currently over 60 years old and remains on death row.